over 95% of the things that we sit up at night and worry about never even happen. Think about it. You sit up and think, oh, my boss is going to say this, and I need to say that, and oh, she's going to do this, and then I need to do that. It never even happens. So we waste all this energy. Folks, I'm emphasizing this because worry really hurts us. Jesus called it sin. It causes us to lose sleep. It causes us to lose our appetite. It can actually cause us to get sick. It can fester inside of you and affect you physically. And mostly, I believe it harms our relationship with God. The opposite of worry, by the way, is not fear. The opposite of worry is hope. Wouldn't it be better if we hoped? If we stood up at night and thought, oh, I think this is going to happen. I hope this happens. One of God's gifts to us is hope. I want to talk a little bit today about worrying. Last week, as I was preparing for this sermon, I read an old article in the from the American Medical Association. It was highlighted in a pastor's journal called Leadership Journal. Do you remember Leadership Journal, Pastor Mark? They used to actually be in like a magazine or a little journal form. Now, like everything else, it's all online. But it's a great journal. It has all kinds of articles, illustrations, real-life stories. This article from AMA said that doctors who are treating cancer patients should not tell their patients how long they have to live. Did you know that? They're discouraged from doing that. Sometimes they do it because they're urged by the patient, but they're actually discouraged from doing this. So if, for example, you have a doctor of oncology, he discovers that his patient has cancer, and he knows that most patients will die within a certain period of time, whatever, 6 months or so, that if you never tell them this, they're likely to live longer. The article was from AMA September of 2003. If you don't tell them, they're likely to live longer. The article went on to say that doctors have very powerful words, and people will often live up to those words, even if it's a negative prognosis. And so giving them a negative prognosis could give them life or maybe death sooner because of their fears will enter in. So yesterday, when I was at our house, I called our in-house medical doctor, Jim Falk, and talked with him about this article. Jim's right now, he must be down in Georgia, I don't know. So I talked with him about this. Maybe he's watching. Hey, Jim, good to have you here. He probably is, because I told him I was going to tell the story. And he told me a really fascinating, true story of something that happened at Columbia Medical School, where Jim went to medical school. There was this professor there who was the chief of staff for the School of Medicine, which is like the high-up department of the school. His name was Dr. Loerb, L-O-E-R-B, Dr. Loerb. And early on in one of his classes, Professor Loerb, he had a large class. It was one of those classes where there were like a couple hundred students, and they were on 2 floors with these desks that were tiered across, lots of students there. And near the beginning of this semester, this class, Dr. Loerb asked the students, if you just found out that one of your patients had cancer, what would you say to them? What would you tell them? And this one student who was near the front, kind of a know-it-all-ish student, a little bit cocky student, he raised his hand and he said, well, I think we need to be honest. He said, I would tell him that he had cancer. And Dr. Loerb suddenly said, young man, this is your last class. You are dismissed from medical school. And the young man was shocked. It's a true story. Jim was telling me this. The young man was shocked, so he gathered up his stuff and he walked back, stood up and started to walk back to the doors to leave. And just before he got to the door, Dr. Loerb said, stop. Come back, take your seat. You're not expelled. And then Dr. Lorb said, young man, I wanted you to know how it feels when you suddenly tell someone they have cancer. That's how it feels. It's over. Doctors, Jim went on to say, they have great power in their words, and they can frame hope or fears for people. Here's the main point of me telling you this story. Even though not telling them increases their likelihood of living, most people often still want to know. So they will plead with their doctor to tell them how much longer they have to live. And so doctors will sometimes tell them. Now, here's the thing, though. Doctors, they know a lot of things. I love my doctor. I hope you love your doctor. I wouldn't be alive, I don't think, without my doctor. But you know what? Doctors are just people. They're just people like you and me. They have fears. They don't always get things right. And only God knows the number of our days. So here's the thing. We would rather worry about things in our minds, mull over things, than to allow faith and life to lead us. We'd rather worry. People have this tendency, I would even say, inner desire to worry. Worrying is just another form of fear. Now, maybe some of you are thinking, oh, Pastor, come on, don't be so idealistic. What's wrong with a little bit of worrying? We got to worry at least a little bit, don't we? Well, I suppose a little bit of concern at times. Sure, we all have concerns, and we should think them over and talk them over with people. But what about when you come to things that are just beyond human control? That's when this can go into worry. And it can just kind of, if we allow it, it will just stay there. By the way, when Jesus said, do not worry, it is important to notice the verb tense of that phrase. He said, do not worry, but the verb tense there for that verb was present, continuous, ongoing. He wasn't just saying, don't ever worry. Really, another way of saying this, I think a better way of translating it is, don't always be worrying. The same kind of translation can be made to a very similar command by Jesus in the very next chapter when he said, don't judge, or you too will be judged. Do not judge. Jesus isn't saying we should never make judgments. We have to make judgments all the time, right? In fact, even the Bible teaches us to make judgments. But don't walk around all the time being judgmental. This is what Jesus is saying. Don't always be judging, having this judgmental spirit. Don't always be worrying is what Jesus is saying here. There's an alternative to worrying. You know what it is? Yeah, giving it to the Lord. There is something we can do when we've reached the end of our beyond human control situation, and that is we can give it to the Lord. 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 7, God's word says, cast all your worries upon him, because he cares for you. Jesus in this passage said, look at the birds. They don't worry. The flowers, they don't toil and spin. Are you not much more valuable than them? Why are you wasting all this time worrying? Mark Twain once said, I have spent most of my life worrying about the things that never even happened. Isn't it true? And there's a psychologist named Dr. Charles Black from the UCLA School of Psychology. He's a cognitive therapist. How'd you like that job, a cognitive therapist? He said over 95% of the things that we sit up at night and worry about never even happen. Think about it. You sit up and think, oh, my boss is going to say this, and I need to say that, and oh, she's going to do this, and I need to do that. it never even happens. So we waste all this energy. Folks, I'm emphasizing this because worry really hurts us. Jesus called it sin. It causes us to lose sleep. It causes us to lose our appetite. It can actually cause us to get sick. It can fester inside of you and affect you physically. And mostly, I believe it harms our relationship with God. The opposite of worry, by the way, is not fear. The opposite of worry is hope. Wouldn't it be better if we hoped? If we stood up at night and thought, oh, I think this is going to happen. I hope this happens. One of God's gifts to us is hope. There are so many good things that can and will happen because we serve a God who has it all in his control. And so he gives us hope. It's interesting to me that this passage, when Jesus talks about the issue of worrying, he starts by talking about money. Now, hang on to your seat. Let's talk a little bit about money. Jesus said, where your money is, that's where your heart is, where your treasure is. The things that you treasure, that really affects your heart. So let me ask you, what are some of the things that you treasure most in your life? I know a lot of guys would say, my job, my title, what I do, I really treasure that. It's true for a lot of men. Some would say, my wife or my husband, my family, my significant other. A lot of people would say my family. And Jesus gives us a warning here. I mean, I truly believe that we should treasure our family. Who wouldn't agree with that? But if you are treasuring anything or anyone, this is the biblical priorities of this stuff. If we're treasuring anything or anyone above God, I'm sorry, but including our family, then we're mixing up something very important in life, our priorities. And if the first thing you think of in the morning when you first get up is your bank account, you have a problem. You cannot serve, Jesus said, God and money at the same time. They are two entirely different things. One is the provision, one is the provider, who will provide you with all your provisions, is what Jesus taught. And then next, Jesus went on to talk about how this kind of worrying and love of money has as an effect on our perception of things. He said, the eye is the lamp of the body. Think about it. Your perception of things. If you're always looking at things through the lens of money, doesn't that affect your whole perception, your ability to relate to people? If you're only looking at work through the eyes of money, that paycheck, then work really becomes a drudgery. If you're always looking at children through the eyes of money, then they just become a nuisance. Even if you're looking at ministry, pastors, if we're looking at ministry through the eyes of money, then church and even faith just becomes a business. If we're looking at people, always, if we're just thinking things through the eyes of money, then people are devalued and even despised. So Jesus said you have to make a decision. Are you going to live for the unseen or the seen? Are you going to live for the temporal or the eternal? Are we going to live for our kingdom down here, our little kingdom in this world, or are we going to live for another kingdom? And by the way, the Bible does not teach that money is the root of all evil. You know that misquoted verse in the Bible? Actually, that's not in the verse in the Bible. Paul wrote in 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 10, the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. That's what the Bible teaches, the love of money. The Bible teaches that money is a snare, that it can lure us into this sense of self-security, into believing that, okay, we have everything now we can just rest. And pretty soon you get lulled into sleep, and pretty soon you forget your need for God, and you even forget about God. And then we start trusting in only ourselves, and we're not seeking God or His righteousness. Jesus said, what should we be doing? Seeking the Lord, seeking God and His righteousness. Then all these things will be added unto you. By the way, James wrote, the righteousness that God accepts as pure and faultless is to look after orphans, widows, and the poor. That's the real righteousness that God is looking for. That we really are selfless and loving, like God is towards us, knowing that He'll provide. He'll provide for you. How many paychecks has God provided for you in your life? Thousands, right? Why are we so fearful that the next one might not come? How short-sighted we can become, which really is lacking in our faith. You cannot worship God and money at the same time. Last year, Karen and I took our granddaughter, Riley, to the Buffalo Zoo. That was a lot of fun. You ever been to the Buffalo Zoo? It's a nice zoo. They got all kinds of animals there. As we were walking around, we came to one of these enclosures where they have these tigers, these huge cats. Do you know that they have a Siberian tiger at the Buffalo Zoo? Beautiful tigers. At least they did last year. There was one tiger there. Her name was Zana. It's the tiger's name. From northern China somewhere. And I read there was this little plaque next to the tiger enclosure. And it described the Siberian tiger, of course. And it said that the Siberian tiger can run up to 50 miles an hour. And that it can jump to a height of 10 feet and at a distance of a little over 30 feet. That's a scary animal. And as I looked at the enclosure that was holding this tiger, I was a little concerned because in this enclosure there was like this little moat between the land section and the wall. The moat was like, 5 or 6 feet. And then the wall that came up to me was about another 5 or 6 feet. And I'm thinking, this tiger could have me for lunch real easily. Wow, what? So I saw one of the zoo staff walking around. I said, hey, what's going on here? This thing says this thing can jump 30 feet across and 10 feet high. Why doesn't he just jump out of this enclosure? And he told me something really interesting. He told me that tigers, like most other cats, will not jump if they cannot see where their feet will land. If they can't see where they're going to land, they never jump. Even if it's a fraction of what they actually can do, their fears keep them from jumping. And folks, we are all a lot like that tiger, without faith. The Bible says without faith it's impossible to please God. And, Hillcrest has some incredibly gifted people. I know, I've met most of you. I'm not trying to butter you up for anything, but we have a lot of really gifted people here, and I think God is calling us at times to jump, to have faith in practical ways where we live. Faith is the ability to trust and walk and jump where we cannot see. So what is God calling you to? I don't know what He's calling you to, but He's not dead. And I know He's always calling us to things. He's calling us just like He called Moses. Moses said, not me, Lord, I can't do that. God is always calling you to something that is greater than you think you are. And the devil is always trying to diminish you and your thoughts of yourself to keep you in a cage. This morning, the invitation is to give your worries to the Lord, to step out in faith. Stop trying what you can't control. Give those things over to God. And if you do so, and if you take these steps of faith, I'm telling you, God could take the worst situations. I've been there. He could take the most painful situations and turn those nightmares round into wonderful dreams, if only we would trust Him.